Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday. So it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions. I answer craft questions, any aspect of craft. I will answer psychological questions like how do I get through the day? How do I get my book written? How do I calm down? How do I focus? That kind of question. I'll answer questions about the book business. I'll answer whatever you have. I know that there are other people who have the same questions. So feel supported and cheered up that everybody is going through the same stuff, or everybody is going through something. If not what you're going through, somebody will be. Um, and It's summer here in Los Angeles. We've had a pretty mild summer after the terrible fires that we've had. It's been pretty mild right now, and the rest of the country has taken the beating in the form of torrential rains. And so, if you are in temporary housing or if you have been through that, my great sympathies for you. Um, Today, I thought I would talk about a book I just read that I found extremely interesting and kind of provocative of getting more kind of a less conventional approach to the page and to what you can do with storytelling. And I think that you guys know that I'm a big fan of Miranda July, who is a performance artist. I generally like performance art. As writers, we are sort of doing performance art all the time, but we do it where nobody can see it, which is basically in our heads. Whereas performance artists go out in the world and do it. Our characters do it. So I find it's very, it feeds the process, it feeds the books, it feeds the writing to see what performance artists are doing. I've been, uh, many people have read uh, her book All Fours, which is currently a big book of last summer and probably this summer too. Um, Her characters are unconventional. There's usually a performance artist who is very much like Miranda July, um, and puts herself in situations that will lead to some kind of unexpected um, encounter. Like that's what she is into, some kind of unexpected encounter. All fours, she's going to take a ride across the country and ends up, like half an hour from home, checking into a motel and meeting all kinds of strange people. And the thing about it is it's an unconventional character, and you wonder, like, why do I care about this? This is somebody who you'll never meet anybody like this. So why do I care? And then she'll come out with some insight about human life that arises from that encounter that um, is worth everybody reading and has something to say for everyone. So it's an interesting experience. I was at the library. My local library has a store. People donate books like crazy, and you can pick up fantastic books for like $1 or $2. And I saw a Miranda July in there, one that I've never heard of. It Chooses You. And what it is, what it is she's worried about the amount of time she spends in virtual in the virtual world. It's written in let's see, it was published in 2011. So already she's worried about how much time she spends in the virtual world on screens and what have you. Um, and she gets in, intrigued by the penny saver. So I don't know if everybody knows what a penny saver is. It used to come in the mail, and people would sell, small objects on it. They'd put, messages, and it was very cheap to advertise. If you um, had under a certain amount of words, it might have even been free. And it just came in the mail. Um, and there's a nostalgic quality to it because we don't have a penny saver anymore. People don't sell stuff through um, classified ads anymore. This is a whole aspect of life that's just gone. And so what she does is she's working on a screenplay, and she's stuck. And we talk a lot about writer's block in here, so I always like books about writer's block. And she is trying to get out of this block she has about her screenplay. And she had written a movie called and directed a movie called You, Me, and Everyone We Know, which was a fantastic movie. She's done a few, and I just love those movies. They're really random. They're really they're full of characters that you've never seen on a movie screen. They're not quite student films, but they retain some of that freshness and the weirdness of oddball characters who are never featured in a Hollywood movie. Um, so she's writing a script for a film, and it's not going well. She can't picture what there's a couple, and she can't figure out what the guy does. And so she's looking at the penny saver and thinking about these people who don't largely are not yet on computers, and her circle, everybody's on a computer. So for her it already had nostalgic factor in 2011. Hi, Marie. So we're talking about Miranda July's book, It Chooses You, where so she's reading The Penny Saver, and she decides that what she's going to do is go and buy whatever little object is being sold at very like far flung corners of Los Angeles. Los Angeles County is a huge, huge area. Um, it's like a quarter of a state. You imagine the size of your state, wherever you're coming from, and imagine, a third of the state being LA County. So it's going to take in at random a really wide variety of people and neighborhoods and cultures. And she brings a photographer and her assistant, I guess, and talks to them on the phone first, because these are all people, they're not on the internet, talking to them on the phone, asking them about the item. And then she makes them an offer, is if they would talk to her, let her interview them about their lives, that she'd give them $50 as well as buying the object. Or maybe instead of buying the object, I don't remember if she really buys it. And then she goes out and has a face to face encounter with people. And now, people in 2025, people are avoiding face to face encounters as much as they can. We've bred a generation, I think that the pandemic had something to do with this. We've raised a generation, and we've participated in this ourselves, being part of the world at the moment, where we avoid face to face. People would rather deal with machine. They would rather go in and use the ATM and just get it over with than have an encounter with a human being behind the counter. They would rather do self checkout at the drugstore or whatever, avoiding having a face-to-face encounter with a cashier. Young Younger people really like using a text. They're loath to make a phone call. It's not face to face, but it's real time. You're listening, you're processing as you go. Um, and to them, it feels like you're putting somebody on the spot to call them. So it's a way in which we are pruning ourselves into less and less human contact. And you know me, I'm a great believer in the senses, and you're really cutting yourself off from the senses. You're sending away a mail order, you don't go into the stores, handle things, have random encounters with clerks and other uh, shoppers. And so she's fighting upstream from this, and she takes a photog. She has people who agree to be interviewed. So that's a small percentage of the people selling stuff on the penny saver. But the people who have agreed to it, she goes to their homes with a photographer, and we get to see the person in their home. We get to see the object that they're selling. Like, this is Michael selling a large black leather jacket in Hollywood. There's the jacket, but we get Michael's story, and Michael is in transition, and what's it like, who is he and how long has it been? It's a Q&A type of setup here. And I just kept thinking, God, for fiction, this is so interesting. I have a character who welcomes the chance encounter, who inquires. I mean, the great thing about a Miranda July book is that she or her characters is they are completely non-judgmental and open to the chance encounter. And most of us just aren't, and this was in 2011. I mean, most of us are pretty averse to that. And it's the stories she gets, the people that she talks to, the weird things that people are into. They're just weird. People are weirder than fiction. And it's something that fiction writers should think about when they decide not to encounter physical reality, is that we're starving ourselves of these very, um, I mean, everybody is a little weird. And it's not a fiction writer's device. It is like everybody is a little weird. Um, so Sarah says, hi, Marie. Marie has the day off. Yay. Sarah says, I am completely guilty of the modern aversion to social interaction and phone calls, which is detrimental to be able to write convincing historical fiction. Yeah, because people encountered each other all the time. They had people they liked, they had people they didn't, they had weird encounters that it's hard to come up with that stuff at random sitting at your desk. The more weird encounters you have, the more you open yourself up to the strange and real, the more material and the more familiarity you have with the strangeness of human life. And this book was such a great reminder of this. So she goes in, she buys, somebody is selling um, a large suitcase. Pauline and Raymond, large suitcase, $20, Glendale. Um, and she starts about off with the suitcase, but there's a son who is living there, or grandson, who has such an incredibly weird and interesting life. So first she's talking to this woman and getting her story, and then she's ending up with this guy who is really interesting and strange. And a lot of these people are at home, and they're quite strange, and they collect things. She's intruding on people's personal worlds. So there'll be like one guy had all these girls, like not posters, but cutouts of magazines of these women and children, and then as she's interviewing them, you can see that it's not some creepy sexual fantasy, but it's a fantasy of a family, and he's somebody who lives with his mother. I don't think he works. I think he's disabled in some way, and so it's her story and then his story. So she picks up these random people. This guy works at a mannequin thing, mannequin factory, manufactory, and he had this sort of crush on some celebrity, and then the guy from the manufactory, his boss, made a mannequin that looks like that woman. So that's what he's got in his room. This is such an amazing book, and I cannot recommend this enough. Some of it's funny, it gives you a picture of a city, and it gives you a picture of the psychic life of the city, and how there are all these little pockets of, in any neighborhood, there's like all these little pockets of weirdness and fantasy, a lot of fantasy. Um, and it's something that we don't see in our art very much. Some of it was funny, just laugh out loud funny, like you can't believe people are doing this. Uh, Somebody was raising cats, like illegal leopards, Bengal leopards, and she goes to buy a Bengal leopard, doesn't, and it trips her out, and they've also got exotic birds. It's all illegal. She's terrified to be in there with the birds, but she's shooting it. And the woman had some terrible thing happen to her face, didn't want her face in the pictures. Um, uh, and the interaction with these people, and then there's like a little where she will go back into her thinking about them as she's leaving, and thinking about aspects of her life that uh, this kind of awakens a uh, understanding of. Somebody bought photo albums of these old people, Pam, photo albums uh, of this couple that she just thought looked very happy, and she was somebody who was living a very quiet, private life. But there were pictures of the trips these people, fairly wealthy people, had taken, and it was like the pleasure that you get from looking at your own photo albums, if you still have photo albums. Only it's not her life; it's somebody else's life, and I think a lot of people are like that. Um, then my favorite one, her favorite, clearly, this guy at the end, who had written all of these uh, gift card, like greeting cards. We cut the fronts off of cards and make cards for his wife, and he gave them to her like 6 times a year. And she was never visible. She was always in a back bedroom, and Miranda thought that she was ill or something, but the guy died. He was like 80 something years old, and no, she just, this was his thing, so she just let him have his thing. So this wonderful romance between these two very old people, and the guy died, and the wife is just so happy that she'd been with him, and it's a kind of a person that Miranda had never met before. She was very aware of her own privilege, her own upbringing when she's meeting these other people. It gives her a chance to look at her own life. So Marie says, I'm writing a story that takes place in the early 2000s and 90s, and it made me realize how less social society has become, how less social society has become. I actually sent in a question for Writing Wednesday about it. It's, this is, it cuts a couple of different ways because our characters have to interact. And it's a challenge to us to investigate more interaction, and interaction maybe with people we don't know well, to knock on a neighbor's door if you need to tell them something rather than leaving a note on their car and having that live interaction. I've seen that so much in my own neighborhood, people who uh, are terrified to go up and knock on their neighbor's door and directly, express what they need. And to me, that's something that could be treated in fiction so many different ways. It might be something that we just need to be more, it's hard to be aware of the world the way it is now. It is very hard to be aware of it and to bring it into fiction because it is more involved in keeping people out and being terrified to be involved with people. I don't know how people make friends, if they didn't grow up with somebody. Um, they text a lot. And to them, that's as satisfying as having a 3-hour meal with somebody that it might be for me. Um, so, yeah, Marie's question about the change in social life and then how do you bring that into a writing Wednesday? I mean, how you bring that into your novel is a really interesting one. So, a story that takes place in the early 2000s and 90s, you thought was, you were wondering about how to bring that into your work, how to think about that. I would say remembering to, hi, 1,000 great books, nice to see you. How to make, like, what is the social flavor or texture of the 90s and the 2000s? How we're shaped by our tech, which you always think you're using the tech, but I think people are becoming highly aware now that the tech is using you as well, and we are changing. There are certainly the reports right now coming to us about the use of AI. I think I talked about this last week. That they've shown the brain is different for somebody who is using AI to write their essays, school essays. I guess it's students. They're using AI to write their essays versus the brains of people who use a search engine to do their research, versus people who don't use anything like that and do their own research and do their own writing. And evidently, there's like a 40% brain loss, intellectual function, in people who use AI for their essays. I mean, it's literally the smarter our tech becomes, the dumber we are. So that's like a warning, but it's also interesting, you know. Um, how would you play that out in fiction if you were writing about this era? Um, it would be interesting to have somebody lose their phone or have it taken away from them or have been hacked and they can't get. I was just hacked, and anybody who looks at my Facebook author page will notice that I can't get into it anymore anymore because I got us into a scam. But if you are in a generation that relies entirely on AI and on text and on, a mediated experience, and then the mediation is taken away for some reason, how frightening life might be. I don't think people are writing about that yet. Uh, so A Thousand Great Books, I don't know your name, but yeah, the MIT study confirms that students using ChatGPT solely for writing essays are getting dumber. Yeah. Stu well, and teachers are having to use blue books, and have people write their essays in class by hand, which is hard because students don't know how to use cursive anymore. So they don't write very fast either. Um, it's just the more we rely on our machines, the dumber we get. And the less we know how to do things. And instead of judging that, this book that I'm reading, Miranda July, what she does is she's just curious about things. So she used the penny saver, and one of the questions when she interviewed her subjects, she asked them if they have a computer, and some of them did, some of them didn't. This is 2011. Some of them did, some of them didn't, but the ones who didn't use them either. So it's like, and she realizes that she's looking at the last gasp of the non-mediated person, the non-mediated consciousness. And there's so much fantasy going on there, and weird corners of existence that maybe were being homogenized by, not maybe, we're being homogenized by our tech. It's very interesting. So good to meet you. It's Samar. Oh, pronounced summer. Okay. Thousand Great Books is summer. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so I'm here to answer writing questions, answer questions about whatever you want to talk about. But let's talk about this modern aversion to social interaction, which makes it very hard to write fiction with where there are groups of people talking, because it's people don't know how to have a conversation. I mean, not everybody, but we're unpracticed at holding our own in a conversation and keeping the ball going. Um, it's something that I think, I hate to say it's not unique to Americans, but I think it's accelerated here because we don't necessarily have the tradition of the 6 o'clock Aperol and then the 8 o'clock dinner. That's basically the entertainment for the evening is dinner, that you see in European cultures. Um, Here everything is fast. It's fast. It's fast. And then what? You have your 10-minute dinner so you can get back to your gaming. Um, I find it what I like about Miranda July is she's curious about it rather than dismissive. And I think whenever you come across information like this MIT study, instead of making that make you that it makes you feel dismissive or judgmental of people, to try to turn on your curiosity. It's like, well, what are they, how would they feel if they have a teacher who won't let them do it? Um, what kind of panic? What kind of shocking, so is it a shocking self-awareness, or is it fury? It exists, why shouldn't I be able to use it? Now schools are being tempted slash forced, or teachers are tempted slash forced to teach using AI, because there's a financial side of this for the schools. And I'm always a big proponent of teaching, especially if anybody out here is teaching, that you should be able to do it under a palm tree, without a computer in sight. But I remember being in classrooms where you're in there and it's a multimedia classroom and there's the TV and you were supposed to use all that stuff because they paid for it. And so it's a vicious circle. Somebody talks them into buying it, and so they force the teachers to use it, and then the students think that that's the way it has to be. And new teachers are coming up who don't know how to teach under a palm tree. Um, I think that we should question our use of computers and our use of the tech and our reluctance, not a judgment, but a challenge. And notice how your life is changing, how your social interactions are changing. So Sarah says, oh, here we go. Okay. So Summer says, I'm quite a reserved person myself, stay indoors mostly, and dread going to the office. But sometimes when I go outside, I meet them and I find them so interesting. I end up using them in my story. Yeah, and I do the same thing. We're so addicted to comfort. And whenever you have random encounters with people, you just don't know what it's going to be. When I was younger, I used to take the bus. And boy, you learn a lot about life in taking the bus in LA, you know. I don't do it anymore. And now I feel like Miranda July, this book, is kind of challenging me to get out more uh, for those random encounters. Um, I talk to people in stores, but you have to be in a store. You don't um, you don't get that when you're mail ordering, And the pandemic has really affected us this way. So Sarah says, my historical protagonist has some form of what we'd call social anxiety. And one of the things I want to explore is how society would have viewed that in the early 20th century. Yeah, much hard, much. It was much stranger back then. I mean, people were in my grandparents' generation. People were in bowling leagues. They were Masons, or Elks, or these fraternal societies. Um, I think that now people who are very active in churches still retain some of that. But for many of us more secular people, especially in the cities, we avoid those interactions. And I think that you would be considered shy. You would be considered kind of an oddball, a wallflower. They had certain names for people who had social anxiety. Um, in rural areas, very common. Um, it was back then very common to be a shy person. Rural people were considered shy people, or people who lived back in the mountains. They were considered shy. They didn't run into people except for relatives. Often those little hamlets, they're just, it's all your relatives. I remember my ex-husband was an attorney, and he was a DA, assistant DA in the largest county in Colorado in the Four Corners, is the Lauren Boebert country. But he would go to these tiny little towns to do a trial. And it's like the standard practice is you ask the jury, do you know the defendant? And in these tiny little towns, especially one in particular I can think of, everybody was related. It's like there was nobody who didn't know the defendant. It was very hard to get an impartial jury. I think he pretty much gave up and got the people who were willing to have an open mind about Cousin Fred. This very, but people in rural areas were considered very shy people. Anybody who's ever done things in the rural area, Nobody is welcome to the farmhouse. It's just like, what? Who are you? What are you doing here? You know? Very suspicious. Um, so our modern society is very much enabling social anxiety. And so it contributes to the furtherance of social anxiety because there's a monetary side to it. The more you're shut into your house, the more they can sell you stuff to mediate with the outside world. Um, and for some reason, people and convenience, people are like addicted to convenience. And that's a big marker of our time, you know, as far as fiction. Uh, Texts, anonymity. Then they have next door, which is a really weird phenomenon. It kind of replaced the penny saver and sort of replaced the local newspaper, area newspaper, of, oh, I saw, it depends on what's going on in the neighborhood, but I go on my next door all the time because now, calling in from occupied Los Angeles, um, you know, everybody is sharing information about what they're seeing in the city, and it's becoming an up to the minute news, citizen news band. Um, but it had been just like, somebody's stealing my mail, or this guy looks suspicious, or have you seen my dog, or you want to buy a doll with a rag, made out of a rag mop. We have something called a buy nothing group, which is also replacing the penny saver. People aren't, or Facebook Marketplace. It's mediated, and actually, that's where these billionaires are making their money, is by mediating between people. They're shoving themselves in between us, which is what's going on. Um, so Sarah says, I take notes on people in my office. Yeah, the office, which people are not going into the office that much anymore, but since the pandemic, but people, it was the one place where you had to be with people you didn't necessarily like, um, which is more. I mean, we've talked about this. The more irritating stuff is, the more stimulating it is for you as a writer. So working with people you don't like, or working for people you don't like, is a stimulating experience. It's just like listening to a radio station that plays all kinds of stuff and you can't control it. And so you hear stuff you like, stuff you don't like, stuff that you never would have thought of. Whereas our culture at the moment is all about feeding you more of what you like. So your world gets smaller and smaller, and also is controlled by people making money on that. So they find that if you're irritated, you you come back more. So if they feed you like news that's enraging, they send you more news that's enraging because you'll click more. It's pretty insidious. Um, so Marie says, you touched on people used to call, now they text. Can you imagine these same people having to sit down and write someone a letter outside of business? Yeah, I certainly, um, I will be much more likely to respond to an email because I know it goes right back to them. Whereas even me, if I have to write a letter, a handwritten letter back, I put that off quite a bit because I think I have a higher standard of what it should look like. And I know that somebody's going to read it more than once. And it seems to be a more serious kind of document. Um, yeah, people used to write amazing letters. If you've watched the Ken Burns series on the Civil War and you see people with an elementary school education, and they wrote beautifully. They wrote beautiful letters with a, fifth grade education that now people in college would be unlikely to write so beautifully. And so that's eroding. Um, yeah, I do write letters to certain people, but most people, if you write a full letter, feel overwhelmed. They feel a demand, like you're demanding something. Just like the way younger people feel about calling somebody on the phone. It seems too intrusive, too demanding, you know. It's like, oh my God, I've got to talk to this person in real life. But it sure is good for your head to have that in the moment interaction. I know people who work with Alzheimer's, memory loss kind of people, like everybody. Um, and you can do crossword puzzles, you can do memory puzzles, all that stuff, but there's nothing more demanding on the brain and restructuring the brain and freshening the brain, growing new synapses and stuff, than a direct encounter with another person in real life. Uh, because you're listening, you're thinking about what you want to say, you're drawing associations, you're watching their expressions, you're trying to keep the conversation going, and it is so rejuvenating that using that in fiction, I think people are hungry for it. So they see a well-written conversation and they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. You can do that. That's interesting. It's much more interesting than, I mean, I have text in the book I'm working on now, but some people in the book will text and use, you for you and so forth. And some people write in complete sentences. Um, and that's a characterological thing. And that's very helpful. So, Uh, Summer says, what would you advise someone writing their debut novel about the perils of draft two or the editing draft? Wow. Well, the peril is that there is such an emotional attachment and emotional um, vibrancy to a first draft. It's so vibrant and alive and full of what you wanted, but it produces a misshapen object of the book itself. And then you go in to work on it, and the danger is that as you start working on it, it's not as nice anymore. Doesn't seem as interesting. But I saw Maxine Hong Kingston speak in LA many years ago, and she said that the how you feel about making your first draft versus the second draft is the first draft, it had this life to it and it was beautiful, but she says you have to think of it as a foundation, that first draft is the foundation, and then you're going to be building on that foundation, and that second story, when you start hammering this thing together, doesn't look as good as the foundation, but the foundation is not a book. So that was good. That kind of woke me up, that the second draft is never looks good, and you kind of have to grit your teeth, and you keep reminding yourself, what was it about this material that made me want to write this book, and make sure that you don't erode that. Keep coming back to that. And no matter if it's a debut novel or it's, you know, your 10th book, it's always going to be a problem, an issue, a part of the process. It's not even a problem, it's part of the process. You experience it as a problem. What if I screw it up? I don't feel it anymore. I'm just making a mess of this. But eventually the book comes together, not just random pieces of the book, which is usually the first has great stuff in it, but um, it's not as integrated as your final book is going to be. So you do have to, sometimes put it back through the blender. Sometimes you can think of it as a butterfly, that has to dissolve in a little chrysalis and then come into itself. That caterpillar is not suitable for framing, even though it was really cool. That it has to melt together and then come back. Yeah, the peril is to lose confidence in yourself. So you have to just know that it's part of the process, and the scariness of it is also part of it. And the more you go through it, the more it doesn't help, but at least you recognize it. When I'm going through it, it's like I've been here before, and it somehow came together. So I have a little more confidence. So I think that's the peril, the biggest peril is losing confidence and needing, that's where a writer's group is really, if you have a writer's group, is really helpful, because they saw your vision in the first draft. So they know what you're going for, and you can use them as an anchor when you say, I've just ruined this thing. I have no idea what I'm doing. They'll go, yeah, remember, this is about, your terror as a young adult on your own, um, with nobody to turn to. And that is really scary. And you did that really well. And don't lose that part. So you remember, oh, yeah, that's hard being a young adult. It gives you an anchor. So anyway, I can't recommend this book enough. I love Miranda July, even though this is nonfiction, but it gives me so many ideas, and we're always looking for a new idea. Um, that books that I like, that I'm going to like, that are just, but I'm not learning anything. It's better for my writing process to read things that are going to give me ideas. And this book was just so full of ideas. I really admired it. So, anyway, I think we're done with another Writing Wednesday, but I wish you good writing, and try to be aware of the mediation between yourself and the world that your tech has kind of instilled in you, and that nervousness about contact and being in contact with people. Have a dinner and see if you can make it last for 3 hours and come up with conversation and stuff like that. That's it's feeding the human being that then can feed the human being of the reader that is going to turn to your book and go, oh yeah, human being, I remember that. So thank you, and I wish you good writing. Okay.